Hello, true crimers, and welcome to Only Murders and the Missing, a podcast presented by UQ Criminal. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of true crime. In each episode, we'll take a deep dive into the story, unraveling the mystery and uncovering the cases that still haunt us. Through our podcast, we will shed light on the victims, honoring their memories and seeking justice on their behalf. Beyond storytelling, we are advocates for the missing and the murdered, lending our voices to those who can no longer speak for themselves. So, grab your headphones and prepare to join our mission. Are you ready? Welcome to Only Murders and the Missing. Episode 23, Stalked, Threatened, and Vanished. The Murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. After weeks of receiving chilling and threatening calls, Dorothy Jane Scott disappeared one night in 1980. Her burning car was later found abandoned, but Dorothy wasn't in it. Anaheim, California. In the late spring of 1980, a 32-year-old single mother, Dorothy Jane Scott, vanished under strange circumstances in Anaheim. Many disturbing phone calls she received before her disappearance suggest she may have been the target of a murderous stalker. The caller told her, "When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits, so no one will ever find you." Her remains were discovered years later, but her killer was never caught. Dorothy was a quiet, reserved woman who worked as a secretary at a head shop in town. She lived with her aunt and spent most of her free time with her 4-year-old son, Sean, whom she adored. Friends and family described her as devoutly religious and cautious, the type of person who always knew how to stay out of trouble. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Dorothy began receiving terrifying anonymous phone calls. A man with a deep, unrecognizable voice would call her at her work and her home, describing in graphic detail how he wanted to torture and kill her. One day, he called and told her to look outside. There, on her car's windshield, lay a dead rose. The caller claimed to be watching her, and he even gave her details about her daily routines, including what clothes she was wearing for the day. Dorothy was rattled by the frightening phone calls. She told her mother that she recognized the voice but couldn't put a name to it. Although she felt uneasy about the creepy messages, she decided not to report the calls to the police. On the evening of May 28, 1980, Dorothy attended an employee meeting at the swinger psych shop where she worked. During the meeting, she noticed her coworker Conrad Bostrom looked like he wasn't feeling very well. His arm was swollen, and Dorothy and another coworker, Pam, insisted on taking him to the hospital. Dorothy drove her car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, following behind Pam, who was transporting Conrad in her vehicle to UCI Medical Center. After an examination, doctors said that Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider. He received treatment and was discharged around 11 p.m. Dorothy then left the hospital, promising to return with her car to give her coworkers a ride home. But she never returned to pick them up. After waiting for several minutes outside, Pam and Conrad wondered where Dorothy could be. Moments later, they saw her white Toyota. It was speeding toward them. The headlights were so bright that Pam could only make out the silhouette of the driver. The car swerved erratically before exiting the hospital parking lot. A few hours later, the concerned coworkers reported Dorothy missing. An extensive search for her and the station wagon began, with help from search parties and the public. A few hours later, her vehicle was found abandoned in a Santa Ana alley, engulfed in flames. There was no trace of Dorothy, but the terror didn't end there. About a week after Dorothy vanished, her parents began receiving phone calls from a man who claimed to have killed her. The voice on the other end would ask, "Is Dorothy home?" And after Dorothy's mother Vera would answer, he would say something like, "I've got her," or "I killed her," before quickly hanging up. The police traced the calls, but the man never stayed on the line long enough, and they couldn't track him down. At one point, recording equipment was installed in the Scott family's home, but the man's voice could never be identified, and no solid leads came from these haunting phone calls. The caller would ask, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" "Yes," replied Vera. "I've got her," he would brag. Orange County ran a newspaper article about Dorothy's disappearance. The suspicious caller rang up the editor of the newspaper, Pat Riley, and told him, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." For the next 4 years, Dorothy's family and friends lived in agonizing uncertainty, not knowing whether she was alive or dead. Then, in 1984, their worst fears were confirmed. On August 6th, remains were discovered at a remote construction site. A partially burned skull, pelvis, arm, and 2 thigh bones were found scattered among the debris. Alongside the body lay a turquoise ring, which Vera immediately recognized as Dorothy's. Also at the scene was a watch that had stopped at 12:32 on the morning of May 29th. This timestamp was only about an hour after Pam and Conrad last saw Dorothy's car, speeding away from the hospital. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Dorothy Jane. The coroner was unable to determine a cause of death due to the condition of the remains, and the case shifted from a missing person investigation to an unsolved murder. To this day, Dorothy's killer remains unidentified, and the case is still open. Numerous theories have circulated about who may have been responsible for her death. Some believe she was murdered by someone she knew, possibly a former acquaintance who had become obsessed with her. This theory aligns with the idea that Dorothy recognized the voice of her stalker, but couldn't place it. Others have speculated that the killer may have been a stranger who developed an infatuation with Dorothy after seeing her at work or around town. Whoever the person was, they clearly had a very disturbing interest in her. Investigators believe the murder of Dorothy Scott could be connected to the disappearance of 25-year-old Patricia Jean Schneider, as both cases share eerily similar details. In each instance, the victims' cars were deliberately set on fire. On July 31st, 1982, Patricia had just wrapped up her shift at the Palomino station in Indian Hills, California. At 3:45 a.m., she called from a Circle K gas station in Pedley, reporting that her car had broken down. That was the last anyone ever heard from her. A Riverside County Sheriff's officer discovered Patricia's car on fire between 5 o'clock and 6 a.m., abandoned in a field near the intersection of Doolittle Avenue and Van Buren Boulevard. Just like Dorothy, there was no sign of Patricia at the scene. Was there a connection between these two cases? Could they share the same killer? Despite the occasional reopening of the case over the years and the countless hours of police work, Dorothy's murder has gone cold. The calls eventually stopped. Will we ever know the identity of the man who terrorized Dorothy and her family for so many years? If you have any information about the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott or Patricia Jean Schneider, please contact the Orange County Sheriff's Department at 714-647-7000 or 949-770-6011. Are you addicted to true crime? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. To connect with me and read more true crime stories, go to unquestionablycriminalonmedium.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.